Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Community Platform on UCTV. Well, we've had our first Eid under lockdown, and I wonder how our listeners and viewers celebrated that. Something that we should actually do a program on at some point. It'd be interesting to find out how people spent their Eid, and what did they do which was different. But that will be for another time. Today we have a very interesting gentleman with us, Brother Tahir Alam. He's an educationalist, he's an expert on education system, and he was a chairman of the governors of a school in Birmingham until 2013, when he and his colleagues at this particular school were labelled as turning or trying to turn your school into Islamic school. It was also termed as Trojan Horse. Now we all know what Trojan Horse was from a historical perspective, but it's very strange why it should be called Trojan Horse. But I'm sure that Brother Tahir Alam will explain. Assalamu alaikum, Tahir bhai.
Welcome, salam wa rahmatullah, and good to be with you, and salam alaikum to all the listeners. Hope they enjoyed their Eid, and although under rather distinguished circumstances.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for giving up your time. I'm very grateful, Tahir bhai. And did you have a pleasant Eid or a very restricted Eid, I believe?
Well, there was a lot of good eating going on, shall we sort of say. That's that's the most enjoyable bit. So we had a few relatives come down, but nothing major, just minor really, adhering to the sensibilities.
So lot of family time, I take it.
Indeed.
Tahir bhai, just take us back. Just briefly explain what was Trojan Horse as far as the school and yourself and your colleagues were concerned.
Yeah, not an easy task to sort of summarize very quickly, but I'll try and have a go at that, so it sort of brings people, into sort of a window onto what actually happened. I worked in education for 25 years, and mainly in the city schools, and ran an academy chain called the Parkview Educational Trust, and we ran 3 academies. And one of the academies in particular, which was the Parkview Academy, which was a very highly successful school, rated outstanding by Ofsted, and we had much accolade really because its results were breaking national trends really against the backdrop. So in this particular school, 99% of the children were of the Muslim faith background, situated in Anwar in Birmingham. So people may be familiar with that. But this particular school, compared to say a national average of 56%, this school had a academic performance really, although academic performance is not the entirety of education, but it's an important part of education. And so but we had consistently had results of running into 70 plus, so 75, 76% of the children would get the government benchmark with A stars C, including English and maths. So which was really trend breaking, and we were recognized for that nationally. And then we had this rather strange intervention, you might say, that came out of the blue as far as we were concerned, triggered by the so-called Trojan Horse letter, which claimed that, that the Muslims were trying to take over, that Tahir Alam, that's myself, and that there are these other Muslim friends and colleagues and people interested really were trying to take over the schools in Birmingham with a view to Islamizing them, was the allegation made in the letter anyway. But that letter was then kind of circulated once or twice, is a detail which I'm kind of overlooking here. But nonetheless, this letter was then picked up by the Department for Education, the then Secretary of State for Education, Michael Gove. And then he took this letter, although the letter was anonymous, is factually written with errors and contradictions. And normally, the police said there's no no issue with any of that. And I think at the same time, Birmingham City Council said we don't believe the letter has any credibility. We know the city very well. There's no truth to the allegations. But nonetheless, the Department for Education, driven by Michael Gove, they intervened, and what ensued was a sustained media offensive that lasted for 5-6 months. Basically accusing our schools, of basically for Islamizing the school, for forcing Islam on the children. So I don't know how we were managing to force Islam on Muslim children, really. But nonetheless, that was the allegation. And there were all sorts of horrible headlines about radicalization, extremism, terrorism headlines, and were printed, in various newspapers, including Birmingham Mail and Daily Telegraph in particular, and Times newspaper, and people are familiar with the outside of the allegations. But nonetheless, anyway, this was a political intervention which basically destroyed these schools. Their academic performance, the spirit of the people who spent years, teachers, governors, parents, and it was a pride of the community actually, but it got destroyed within a month or two. The school was brought back to essentially being a low-achieving school, underachieving school, and what I would say a pretty mediocre, middle-of-the-range school, really. So the results fell from 75%. Once we had left, the results in the subsequent years, they fell from 75% down to 41%. And that's where the school is now at the moment. And the government's case, if you like, against the teachers collapsed because people were misled. Basically, the government officials and the people that got the case against the teachers that they were promoting all these things was proven they were just selling a pack of porky trees, and that was exposed. So therefore, the entire legal cases collapsed against all the teachers in the school. But that didn't help anybody because their careers were destroyed anyway, and we had kind of had to resign and move on. And subsequently, I was supposed to be running this conspiracy, but I was running a conspiracy with myself, actually. Conspiracy normally requires more than one person, but anyway, I ran a conspiracy myself because I'm the only person who remains currently till now as well, barred from running schools, basically, from leading and managing schools. I'm barred from doing that, although, of course, I ran some of the most successful schools in the country, but that's that was the intervention anyway, politically motivated, based on, from my point of view, quite clearly based on a pack of, false allegations and lies, but this is where we are, driven by Islamophobia, of course, and partly racism as well, I would say. So that's it's very difficult to summarize, but I've tried to cover as many points as I can. It's been 6 years since then, really, so a lot has happened. I suppose I continue to fight to project the truth and to speak the truth and to highlight the injustice of the whole thing and the fact that the government intervention they managed to destroy the schools that took so much effort, energy, time, and commitment for people to build over so many years. And now that these schools are not doing well, of course, now everybody's happy. Ofsted are very happy, and they think the schools are good now. So the results went from 75 down to 41, and the Ofsted judgment went from inadequate, which is a grade 4 judgment, to a grade 2 judgment. So can you imagine the reverse of now? So the Ofsted, you couldn't make it up if you tried really. So the results go down, but the Ofsted judgment goes up. So this is where we are really. So that's in quick summary, really.
No, it's At any point, Tahir Bhai, if you go back to 2013 and now it's 2020, just over 6 years ago, any point did you feel that you're going to wake up from a nightmare and this is not really happening? It couldn't happen in the 21st century. It's a nightmare. At any point, did you feel that?
What I sort of do think about even now, actually, that when I meet some people and they look at the media coverage, the profile, at the end of the day, to be honest, I'm just an ordinary guy who was running the 3 schools in the area in which I lived. And they're the very schools that I went to as well as a child. So these were schools that I went to. Nansen Academy I went to as a primary school child. And I went to Parkview as a secondary school child. So I'm just involved in these, but they've made me into some kind of a monster, if you like, of some description, really, who was imposing Islamic will on everybody. But nonetheless, I do feel sometimes that, that this was all completely unnecessary, because I think that the skills that I had and the other governors, the parent governors and the institutions that we ran, those skills could have been used actually on a much wider scale to address the issues of underachievement, to address the issues of failure of children in these inner city schools, which continues to be a massive problem. But instead they chose to, the people in power, so to speak, and in abusing their power, they chose basically to pursue these, baseless allegations and pursued a witch hunt against myself and my fellow governors and teachers as well. And so many teachers lost their jobs as part of this, and they're not able to get a job, although they're not barred or anything, they have not found guilty of anything, but they still can't get jobs because their names have been, tarnished and blackened through the whole process, and nobody wants any association with them.
It's quite a devastating impact, not only on the children of the school who, as you said, it's from 70 plus percent to now to 40, less than 40% here, but also on the community at large, the parents, but the educationalists. Life must have been completely come to a standstill.
Yeah, one of the impacts actually has been that this particular episode, the Trojan Horse allegations and the interventions and the hysteria and the Islamophobia that was whipped up against the Muslim community, that actually deterred a lot of people from participating in education, in making a contribution in the field of education as governors, and even in arguing for, if you like, and arguing for the fact that their children should be catered for as Muslims within the state education system. So it has created a culture of discrimination. It has legitimized, I would say, it has sort of legitimized, legalized, and institutionalized a culture of discrimination against Muslim children, where Muslim children are reluctant, in fact, to express anything of the Islamic perspective or their beliefs or their values and so on, and make requests for such an accommodation, which should be very normal, in a democratic, open society. But that's not the case, because they think they'll be picked on, and they will be, because there's a culture of surveillance has been introduced on the back of all this within schools. The prevent duty that was made statutory. So teachers are also now spying on Muslim children. They're also now spying on parents and their families as well. So it has created a culture of fear, and has had a very sort of chilling effect, on children and on parents as well, and people and Muslim teachers as well. I know Muslim teachers who have refused to oversee the prayer facilities within the school or lead Friday prayers, because they will not be seen positively by the leadership and management, because they could be thought of as, Islamizing the school or promoting Islam to the children, whereas, for a long time, this was quite normal practice. So if you're a Muslim teacher in the school, and some children want to pray, but the teacher wants to pray as well. They provide a free supervisory role, so children do have a tendency to misbehave maybe and, abuse some of the freedoms that might be given. So chief teacher supervision is quite important.
Absolutely.
But those very normal, sensible things are being viewed through the prism of radicalization, through the prism of terrorism, I would say, and extremism, which is, which is very, very damaging, and essentially it reduces Muslim children and Muslim families really to second, third grade citizens, where they're not able to, openly express and demand what they feel should be a very basic right.
Yes, it's not, as I said, it's not only damaging to the children but also to the professionals. That way, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, one more question connected with the Trojan Horse. But I would like also to seek your advice to see the lockdown as we have today. I know that you've been under lockdown since 2013, but the lockdown that we have today and the impact of that on our educational system, and of course the government is looking at opening up schools. Is that a good thing? Is that not a good thing? What is your view on that? But we'll be back within the next 60 seconds. Stay tuned. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Community Platform on UCTV. Just before our break, of course, we were talking to Brother Tahir Alam about his journey from 2013 to present day under the label of Trojan Horse. And basically, he's been under lockdown since then with other staff members who were at a particular schools who were accused of Islamizing the school. Tahir Bhai, Assalamu alaikum and welcome back.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Tahir Bhai, during break we were just discussing that yes, there was an element of community engagement. Do you think that community engagement was enough, or could that have been a little better, or could it have been a little more active?
Well, there could have been a more forceful, more organized, a more powerful response, I would say, and more powerful objections from parliamentarians, perhaps, who understood the issue, and also from parents, perhaps, and the wider community as well. But I think one of the things that prevented people from doing that, to be honest, was the barrage of allegations of radicalization, extremism, and terrorism. That kind of language is being used, and the guy who was hired to investigate the whole matter was Peter Clark, who knows nothing about education whatsoever by his own admission. That's what he said to me. Knew nothing about education, but he was hired because of his terrorism experience. So the government, so the intent is very clear from Michael Gove, that they thought that these guys we were up to no good in terms of radicalizing the children, or introducing extremist ideas to the children, and so on. So that was the element. So when I criticize, if you like, that the response could have been much better. But people were fearful, to be honest. And the local councillors that I spoke to, they were fearful that if they spoke, then they may well be labelled as, supporting radicalization or extremism and that kind of thing. So deliberately, a culture, if you like, an atmosphere, environment of fear was created, which silenced an awful lot of people because they didn't stand with me. And even now, to be honest, I get people coming to my house who are my friends and who are well known to me and so on. And in that sense, when they come into my house, sometimes they say, well, can you take the batteries out of your phone? And I'll take the batteries out of my phone because they think I might be they might be monitoring or something like this, whatever. So it has created a very awkward kind of, environment and culture. So fear was an important element, the fear of labeling, being labeled being labeled as supporting radicalization or extremism was something that silenced people.
Manufactured fear is always a very dangerous point in any society. And it's a sad story, it doesn't matter how many times you hear it. There's quite a lot of emotions. But we have a lockdown at the moment, Tahir Bhai, that we've been under lockdown since, I think, since beginning of, March, I think, isn't it? About 2 months.
21st of March, I think. So, it's been 2 months.
Yeah. It's amazing how time flies, but there are some conversations that are taking place, and I think the government is ready to open up primary school, certainly for I think year 1 or year 6. I could be wrong. What is your views? What do you think is encouraging? Do you think we have enough safety elements in place that we can allow children to go back?
I mean, one of the challenges and the difficulty has been that the government itself has not been sure about what they're doing, and that's very apparent. But nonetheless, I mean, they're trying to do their best, I think, under the circumstances, and they don't know what the solution is. But nonetheless, I think for the sake of the economy, it is important, as well as for educational reasons. They've deemed that it's important for children the age of reception and year 1 and year 6 to start with. So they're not saying all the primary schools should open, but say nearly 50% of the primary school. They want half of it to open. So that would the suggestion is that would allow some kind of normalization to begin in a small way. So the school will be more than 50% empty. So the social distancing measures and all the other precautions about spraying the handles and testing the children maybe, and the unions are demanding that, teachers should be tested obviously on a regular basis, I would have thought, and obviously the children would also be tested on a regular basis. So they want to, in a bid to normalize things, the government wants to initiate the process although they're saying they're not going to penalize parents if they are still fearful and do not send their children to school. There'll be no penalties for them, but nonetheless, they do want to start in some small way the normalization process. I've had some parents asking me whether they should send their children or not. It's a very difficult question for me to answer, but I think that one of the considerations which have been raised, of course, there are some teachers maybe, 65 years old, they may have some underlying conditions and so on. I think they probably will be exempt from coming into the school and teaching in the school. Likewise, there will be some families, who are living with people who are vulnerable to the virus, in which case the government, I think, is quite okay with the idea that those teachers will now not have to come in, and that's okay. And if some children, for those very reasons, if they're living with people who are vulnerable in their families, don't want to send their children into school, then the government has said that they're not going to penalize them either, till the end of July. So there is some flexibility, but I think the government is quite keen to make some kind of start, even though it may be a rather patchy or a low-level start to the whole thing. So at least he introduces the procedural precautions, if you like, in order to keep a handle on the virus and so on. So it's not something that, anybody's 100% sure about, including the government. But nonetheless, I mean, they're deemed important for reasons of the economy. Less so for reasons, my personal view is that it's less so for reasons of loss of education of the children, in one sense. A 2 months of education loss out of 12 years of full-time schooling is not a big deal, to be honest.
But when you've got you have a place like Eton, for example, where the university face-to-face teaching, unless I'm wrong, of course, will not begin until September 2021, and it just makes me wonder, why are we not opening up those places for students to go back to?
Yeah, I mean, there is a contradiction, there is inconsistency, which is undeniable in all of that. They want to begin with the younger children. The government wants to begin with the younger children. I mean, the rationale isn't particularly strong or anything. I mean, I don't see, if you're going to begin with, say, 3-year groups, which is sort of, you might say, 40% of the school year. I mean, that particular measure could be introduced as a starting point for every school in the country. They could say, okay, 30% of the children can start on the 1st of June. Depending upon how those 30% go, there should be some criteria for selecting those children, obviously, and some of the things I've mentioned. That could apply to secondary school as well. That could apply to technical colleges as well. And that could apply to Eton as well, so that not all children, but nonetheless, I mean, there are other issues with that, of course, educationally. So how do you choose the ones that you're going to come in? The others will lose out on the education and so on. So it is quite complex. It's not straightforward. There's no straightforward formula. But nonetheless, there's a balance to be struck here, and I don't think the government can win really as far as the balance is concerned, because there's always one side is up and the other one is down. Just the nature of the complexity of the issue.
Well, opening up,
and there are inconsistencies.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think the question was, will opening up the schools also open way for places of worship to open up?
Yeah, that's right. I think the Prime Minister mentioned that they're looking at opening the places of worship in July sometime. So they want to see how the schools go for a month. Yeah, so they'll have an idea with the increased testing and so on. So once that data comes in, 4, 5, 6 weeks worth of data, it'll be time for the worship places to be opened up in some limited capacity or something like that. So I think they want to really have a go at easing the lockdown and just monitor the situation. I think it's not decided what the pace of normalization will be. They just want to do this, that, and the other, and see how it goes, and reevaluate on an ongoing, continual basis, and make decisions that way.
Tahir Bhai, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, talking with you, and I hope that that we can get you here live once this lockdown is all finished, and we genuinely wish you well, and hope things can improve for you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide you and help you. But thank you so much for your valuable time that you've given up for us. We value your input. Jazakallah khair. Thank you.
Okay, assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Tahir Alam from Birmingham. I've met Tahir Bhai several times. In good times when there was no Trojan affair. He's a brilliant mind, an educationalist who really wants all the communities to be progressing. Sad time for him and his colleagues, and we wish him well. And if your children are going back to school, it's a decision that we all have to make for our own children, for our families. Time for reflection, I think. Until next week, look after yourself and your neighbor, whoever they may be. Jazakallah khair. Join me next week. Assalamu alaikum.